If you want to learn about psychological growth without getting lost in complicated language, you're in the right place. This is the Relational Psych Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Carly Claney, licensed psychologist and the founder and CEO of Relational Psych. On this show, we learn about the processes and theories behind personal growth. Please keep in mind that this podcast isn't a substitute for therapeutic advice, but we're here to point you in the right direction. Today on our podcast, we have Tamasin Thomas, who goes by Tammy and is a former licensed financial planner turned licensed mental health therapist. She has explored the intersection of money and psychology all of her career, exploring what's going on below the surface or on a deeper level when it comes to our relationship with money. The outcome of this work is helping people understand themselves better, make more conscious choices around money, decrease tension and conflict with money, while increasing peace and empowerment around money. Tammy, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Me too. The topic is scarcity money mindset. And I'm so excited to have you on the podcast to talk about this in part because of our shared history. You were my coach a couple years ago when I first started in private practice and then expanded into the group. And I learned so much just about different experiences with money, both on a very business side of things, but then also my own personal development with my relationship with money. So when we talk specifically about scarcity money mindset, I would love to know from you why we're talking about this today.
Yeah, that's a good question. There are a lot of different areas I think we could explore with money. Um, Scarcity feels like the area that's to me in the work that I've done over the decades, the one that's least talked about, but most impacting people's lives. It's like the unspoken fear that is calling the shots in the driver's seat, and no one really wants fear or scarcity money mindset to be calling the shots. And yet, no one's talking about how to change who drives in the car and who
Mhm.
makes the decisions and how we run our lives. It just hinders, I think,
Mm.
us as human beings. And I've seen it a lot, and I know it's a large part of my story. It's a large part of my clients' stories. Why did that sound attractive when we thought about bringing it to this podcast?
Yeah, I think similarly to what you're bringing in, it seems like such an impact on people's lives and it feels unconscious. It can feel like something that's not known, not explored, taboo or scary, or just really emotionally laden, bringing in a lot of feelings like shame or confusion or those kinds of things. So I think being having a place where we're able to speak to it and demystify it, hopefully in this next amount of time, will help for people listening to be able to see themselves in the story and give them a path forward to making some of that unconscious more conscious and then hopefully have more agency in what they do next.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. So too.
And we start defining some of it when we talk about scarcity money mindset. Where are we going with that? What's our framework for thinking about it?
So let's start with what it's not, right? There is a very legitimate, someone's doesn't have a job and they don't have money to pay the rent or go grocery shopping, or they grew up in poverty. That is scarcity. And that would be a scarcity money mindset that would be very legitimate. It's not the the scarcity money mindset we are going to be talking about today. So I want to really validate circumstances that would be defined as poverty or would be defined as legitimate scarcity, and really acknowledge that and say that's not actually what we're going to be talking about today. The scarcity money mindset that we are wanting to explore today is more of um, us believing that feeling like there's never going to be enough money. That's the most common, is no matter I have a great job, I'm able to pay my bills every month, but no matter what, I don't feel like it's enough. I would say some examples of that mindset, or some examples of the pain points that I think people are going to be able to resonate more with that than identifying the scarcity, is going to be emotional spending as a coping mechanism, specifically impulse spending.
Mm. Like
Uh,
scrolling on Amazon for hours and just buying whatever you
yeah,
see.
or going into Sephora or Ulta and just a ton of money when you've got stuff at home. You don't just go in for one product, or you go in for one product and you come up with 20, right? Feeling of a scarcity despite having enough money. I mentioned that earlier. Difficulty in discussing money matters with a partner, a life partner, or
Mm.
husband or wife. Belief that money is the root of your problems, not the root of all evil, but if you had money, if I just had a little bit more money, things would
Yeah.
be better. That's usually the pain point that people define. Other places are we doubt our ability to make smart financial decisions. So a lot of
Mhm.
second guessing, procrastination of financial planning tasks. Let's say you wanna meet with a financial planner, but you don't do it. Or let's say you wanna organize your monthly finances, but you just keep winging it and you don't
Mhm.
really it's something you gotta do, but it's fear of not being able to provide for the family, again, despite a good job, anxiety around future financial security, and this is usually despite having a good job and putting saving strategies in place. Do you see that we're getting to a pattern here? I got 2 more examples. Comparison with others leading to financial stress. So and so has the same job that I do, or they make the same amount of money, but they have this certain card, this bigger house than I do, or any type of comparison. The heart of that is actually scarcity money mindset. And then the last pain point I come across a lot with my clients is feeling guilty about spending money on yourself. Again, I think of families, I think of stay-at-home moms, right, that want to put their kids
Mhm.
first and make sure they have swim lessons and gymnastics lessons, and that they have a hard time buying themselves, I don't know, like a shirt or a different shade of lipstick when they have all these shades out.
Let alone therapy or something that would be much more of a financial investment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. You had a couple facial expressions with some of those examples I put out there. Any resonate with you specifically?
Yeah, I think it is interesting to reflect personally because there's the theme that you highlighted of how I took it in is things can change, but your feelings don't. So your financial situation changes, but those anxieties are still there. Or you become more successful, or maybe you stop avoiding and you make the plan and you're moving towards that plan that hopefully will set you up for success in the future. And yet, that checking, that anxiety that can come in, I think that does resonate with me of like, oh, did I do it enough? Did I figure it out? And then, yeah, I think the feelings that both I could resonate with and also I could hear in my clients a lot of things around shoulds, and that's actually the biggest one, like, all of these shoulds of either in comparison to other people or myself or my past self, there's just a lot of pressure that I think I also hear in this perspective.
Yeah, I love that. It brings to mind when I was a financial planner and I was working with people. I worked with teachers all the way up to zillionaires, and it didn't really matter the amount of money that they had. Some of
Mm,
the people that struggled the most with feeling like they didn't have enough was actually people that were very financially secure and stable. And some others, like teachers who work their tail off and really don't get compensated for their education and what they offer well, were some of the most secure people in their financial plan. And
mm,
so the dollar amount of what's in the bank account is not the type of security we're talking about here. We're talking about something a little deeper in terms of I have a scarcity money mindset, but is it actually about money? And if it's not, what else could it possibly be about? On a day to day basis, I would say what I hear the most with both past clients and current clients, whether they're therapy clients or money coaching clients, are phrases like, that's too expensive. I can't afford that. I'd love to work with you as a coach one-on-one, but I can't afford that. I'd love to do therapy, but I can't afford that. I'd love to go on vacation, but I can't afford that. I'd love to have a gym membership, but I can't afford that. We don't get to be those people, right?
mhm,
That's where the guilt comes in. We have a roof over our head and a car in the driveway. We don't get to be people that complain about scarcity of money. That's some other phrases. Penny pinching to an extreme, right? That can really show up on a day to day basis. Obviously, having an outline or a budget is, I'm talking about the extreme penny pinching. On the opposite end of the spectrum, pretending to have a lot of money when you don't, this idea of needing to
Mhm.
keep up with the Joneses. And in all of these things, shame around financial decisions, like you mentioned earlier. Am I doing enough? Am I doing it right? What will people think of me? I know for a lot of families where maybe one person is working, the person that's home feeling, if they're managing the financials, the pressure of, am I being a good steward of this money? And if they're
Yeah.
not managing the finances and they're just managing the kids and the income provider is managing the finances, I've worked with a lot of men that feel very alone in that. And when we get into it, it's actually not about the money. It's about
Mm.
some sort of scarcity from some other part of their story, right? That's getting acted out within the family unit or the marriage context, but it's getting put on the money.
Mm.
Most of the men say, I've got great marriage. I've got, you don't connect feeling lonely in a marriage just around money and making
Mm.
decisions. And obviously, the one that's on the top of the funnel that everyone can relate to is navigating conflict around money. They don't want to lose the connection to their partner, but they also don't know how to navigate it. It can be really scary.
It also sounds like in that you're pulling in all of the different factors that are playing out, both the connection piece, the emotional communication skills, but then there's also values and the shoulds and the expectations we have for ourselves and others. And I'm curious when you hear some of those phrases from your clients or people in your life saying, it's too expensive, we can't afford that, we're not those kind of people. How do you know, or maybe would someone else know that's not true or that it's not necessarily true? Or like the challenge back against of, but maybe you could afford it, or maybe the term, is it expensive or not, that there's more loaded into that. I'm just curious how you even begin to tap into that.
Wonderful question. And I feel like I could give you some examples from clients, but I almost feel like maybe sharing a little bit of my own process and my own story in this be really helpful because in many ways it's just a feeling that we have to draw awareness to. That then once we draw awareness to, we have to step back and go, but is that true? For me, I think that's a lot of how I grew my own awareness of my own relationship to money and specifically the scarcity part of it. My undergraduate is in business economics and accounting, right? I have a career in finance and specifically financial planning. And for me to feel like there's never enough or to feel like I can't afford that, that's a friendly white flag saying, hey, kiddo, this ain't about the money. Because
Mhm.
I know that if I wanted something, I could rearrange how I spend my money that month and I could afford it, or I could save for however many months it would take and I could afford it. It was more of a what's going on here? And it wasn't until I really began to look at my relationship with money through a psychological lens that I actually began to understand it. It didn't
Mm.
matter how many finance classes or how many licenses I got in the financial world, it didn't really change my feelings until I was able to acknowledge my feelings around money honestly, which took a lot of courage, and then had to look at where those feelings might be coming from or where they might have stemmed from. And for me, in my personal therapy work, I got to a point where I was able to acknowledge I experienced a lot of emotional and financial neglect and abandonment from my parents. I obviously had a roof over my head and I had food at every meal. But in many ways, I felt like I was raising myself. I felt like I was raising my sister. And anything that I wanted after the age of 9, I had to somehow figure out how to get some money and buy it. 'Cause that included things like the fee to be on the basketball team in 5th grade. Just way too early to have to worry about finances from a developmental standpoint. And then my parents argued about money all the time. So they also neglected and abandoned themselves in that too. And so there was just like this in the air feeling of neglect and abandonment emotionally and with finances. And I picked up on it as a kid and I was trying to understand it. I was reading magazines and reading books I can find in the library and was just trying to figure it out. And When I was able to put that lens onto money, I began to recognize that there has been a scarcity, but was the scarcity around money, right? And that is overall, I feel like my entire career I've had enough. But in terms of finances, but the scarcity money mindset that I have applied to my finances is more about the feeling of not having enough attention, not having enough affection as a kid, not feeling delighted in or enjoyed by my parents, not feeling that neglect and abandonment. In other words, my body did have a very real experience of scarcity, but my body couldn't place that in essence where it came from. My body chose to place that on to money. And that took a lot of freaking work to figure that out because it's not super clear. And I had to be honest about an impact that my parents had on me that probably most likely was not intentional. And so there's this bind of wanting to know my parents did the very best that they could, but also wanting to acknowledge the impact on me and really needing to get comfortable acknowledging their humanness and the fact that they weren't perfect in order for me to heal and really heal this scarcity wound, neglect and abandonment that was in my world being put onto money. And the therapist, I know you can relate that it's very common for us as humans to place emotional wounds that we have that are not yet processed onto things outside of ourselves. My body could have placed that onto food. I could have tried to give myself comfort by eating more food than my body needed by trying to fill an emotional void with a full tummy, right? I could have placed it onto sex, trying to have a feeling of someone caring about me by having sex with any man that looked my way. I could have done that. That is not where my body chose to process my particular trauma or my particular wound. My particular body chose to process it money. And once I realized that, then I could really care for it and I could actually do the work to heal it. And then as the healing occurred, it actually allowed for confidence. It allowed for empowerment. It allowed for financial groundedness. It allowed for feeling really connected to myself and growing a sense of self and being able to show up differently in relationships. It's mental health in a nutshell, but those are things that are very hard to articulate in terms of the benefit. But it was like a radical difference in my being and in my spirit and how I operated in the world that was just so freeing
Mm.
and really a maturing and a healing and an acceptance. And I don't know all the quite words, but it was like lovely. And I would recommend it, but I don't have the words to give you that fully articulate the experience.
I think you're giving a lot of words to it. In particular, I really love that focus on how much work it took and intentionality to do that untangling, which really came first from the awareness.
If I were to like sum up the result of the impact of healing, first of all, I don't think I can sum it up, but if I were to attempt it, it would be that fear no longer runs the show. That fear that drives that scarcity money mindset. It no longer impacts my decisions, both consciously and unconsciously. So it's
Mm.
like I've taken back my power. Fear, like controlling my life and me looking around going, why did I do that? I've been able to take back my power, and that's where the empowerment feeling comes in. And then the
Mm.
confidence feeling that
Mm.
I am in charge of my finances and I'm not making decisions based off of some wound that is unconscious and unknown to me running my world.
Yes. And two, I think it really highlights what an internal process of growth that is. And it's in contrast because I think there are probably on the outside a way that someone could look at the way that you've managed money or your life or prepared that just looks good. Like you've been responsible and you're in control or all of these very like high achieving ways of looking at it. And yet I think the way you're describing it speaks so much to it can look great or we can praise someone for being so responsible. Oh, the 9-year-old that's so responsible and yet you're really being able to highlight now what is going on inside that feels so different than the growth that you've made and now that the freedom that there's no fear and there's more empowerment and there's more choice associated with that. And that's a healthier, more robust way of living. It just feels rich and yeah, empowered, just a lot of words there. versus that tightly wound, maybe it looks great, but it doesn't feel good. I think you're describing now a lot of those outcomes that people could feel from or experience from being able to do this kind of work. I'm curious if we can unpack a little bit more of what's happening in the process, what needs to be done, the work that needs to be done. I think we've outlined the awareness piece, being able to have the bravery or the courage to look inside or even look at relationships in our life. What are some other pieces? What are some other parts of the process?
What's coming to mind to me right now is this idea of a wall. I think when I first started this work, there was so much resistance to it. That was the fear of if I go and begin to look at my relationship with money from the psychological lens, is my whole world going to crumble? Am I going to crumble? Am I going to have what you and I would refer to as a psychological collapse, or people might refer to as my whole world just exploded? And I don't know what I don't know how to function. I don't know how
Yeah.
to get out of bed. I don't know how to feel. I don't know what to make of this mess inside of me. And I think when I think about what do we need to do, not only is the first step growing awareness, but I think it would be also recognizing the resistance, right? And
Mhm.
recognizing that fear, that wall that we built, and to really find someone that can walk with us in a way that respects the wall. Because
Mhm.
for so long, that wall helped me survive a world of daily neglect and abandonment, dismissal, detachment, disconnection. Children are seen and not heard. You don't even know I'm in the room. Those feelings, that wall was a dear friend for a long time. So, to our bodies, it's going to be very natural for that resistance or that wall to say, oh, hell no. Good on you. Way to be brave and want to do this. But there's no effing way we're going to go do this.
Mhm.
My job is to protect you. And I belong here. My job is the wall and I belong here and I am protecting you. So it's like lovingly, I had to lovingly come alongside of that fear, that resistance, that wall and say, I get it. You got a job. You've
Mm.
done it so well.
I
And I
did
love
too
you
well.
for it. I love you for it. But where you were once serving me in a way that really helped get me to the next level, now you're actually holding me back.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
I need to lovingly and gently ask you to take this wall down. And bit by bit, it doesn't have to be fast. And learning how to do that, which takes a lot of patience, a lot of self acceptance, a lot of self kindness, a lot of compassion, and really beginning to feel our feelings and learn to care for them. And some of us can do that on our own, some of us can't. It's going to help your body feel safer as the wall comes down, right? I don't think any of us were meant to build that wall. It doesn't get built by itself and it doesn't get taken down by itself.
Yeah. And it takes 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years to build. It's going to take some time to rebuild and have a different option, really. I think that's what really comes to mind when you talk about honoring the wall and in some ways having gratitude for you helped me survive. I got here, I got to whatever level of success, or maybe the success was getting out of that situation, or maybe you felt like you've lived a really privileged life the whole time, or whatever it might be. I've been successful with this wall. And then, like you said, it's not functioning, or it's not working for me anymore. It's not serving me in the same way that it served me to get here. But if I don't have anything to replace it with, there's no way I can just strip it away and just have someone else, even a therapist, say, oh, just don't do that anymore. Just don't think or feel that way. You really need to have the patience to I don't know, I'm curious if you what you think of this imagery about it, but I almost see like a brick by brick replacement. It's not like you're making a wall, like changing the wall for a wall, but it's you can replace this brick with something else, and then suddenly you have a new foundation to have new patterns, have a new way of being with yourself and others.
Yeah, no, I like the illustration. I would say maybe the brick is being replaced with something like self compassion. Right.
Mhm.
So it's there, but it's not as hard and cold and heavy
Mm,
and not creating distance.
yeah, creating room to be
Yeah.
more present with yourself.
And that impacts how you are with everyone around you. If you're in a marriage or partnership, the person you've chosen to do that with, it changes our style of relating and I think there's more embodiment in being present to like life, the goodness, the joy, the grief, right? But being able to handle all that and not have it destroy us, right?
Yeah. And hold it a little loosely. Like, I think with self compassion and self awareness and moving through all these experiences, you're not as tightly wound. Things don't
Yeah.
have to be as perfect or as precise. There's more room for us to be a bit messier, or for our partners to be more messy. And you just increase your tolerance
Yes.
towards life. Are there other ways that it would impact a partnership, two people in a relationship? What could that marriage or that relationship look like through people doing this work?
My big thing is I think doing this work actually leads to more intimacy. It
Mm,
leads to more emotional connection and closeness, less emotional distance, less conflict, less tension, less avoidance. I got this from Rising Woman is this idea of allies in each other's healing. We
mm,
all have first families. We all have feelings, which means we all have baggage. And so really talk about the idea of entering into marriage in a way where both partners have a conscious awareness of and they know that their deepest always are going to get brought up by the other person. And that's for them to work through likewise on the other side. So if I know that my partner is my ally, right? If I know that when I have a bad moment with him, instead of it potentially creating a whole lot of distance, I have the capacity to come back and say, what you saw the other day was me being very triggered. An old wound got brought up. I know that was not your intention, but I would love to share with you why. Because over the
mm.
past 3 days, I've really been thinking about why I reacted the way I did. And I've learned something more about myself. And as someone that has, I think it might be helpful for you to know this. And I would love to share with you what would be helpful next time this happens. And that I would offer him the same thing so that when
Mhm.
he gets triggered or flooded or has a bad moment, there he would know I'm not leaving. I would know that he would go and do his work. And when he comes back, I'm going to learn something about him. And I'm also going to learn better how to love him. So the idea is that we are helping each other heal. We are growing the ability to be more honest and intimate with our own selves, and then growing the ability to communicate that with the other in hopes of forming a really solid, deep connection that isn't just about pizza and movie night on Friday night.
Yeah. And it's also not the level of enmeshment that can happen too of, "Oh, I got activated or you got activated." We're responsible for fixing it or resolving it. I think I really loved the way you described how much of this work is individual and together, but it's not this blending where it becomes so much of your responsibilities for someone else.
So I believe money is an avenue to do that with
Mhm.
if we handle conflict around money well, and if we can begin to look at our own relationship with money. And scarcity money mindset is one lens. There's attachment styles with money. There's looking at the relationship as a whole. There's a lot of different ways how we organize our finances. There's a lot of different things. All of that my calling, if you will, is to help draw awareness to this intersection of psychology and money. And if we are brave enough to look at how healing it can be for us as individuals, but also how it can grow more intimacy within the relationships that we operate in, whether
Mhm.
that's a life partner or friends or family members or whatever the case may be.
Yeah. As we're talking about this, I am finding myself thinking about really people in my world, both in the group practice, other therapists or new therapists who are starting their own practice, or a lot of clients who have a lot of financial privilege, whether that comes from family money or their own trajectory that's been financially quite successful. And one of the things that comes up really for a lot of people, and I think it's in reflection to this idea of scarcity, is the conflict around the privilege, the conflict around, I shouldn't be stressed here. I don't have anything to worry about. I am not in the position that there's so many other, let's say, Americans are in. Why is this so hard for me? And then I will group these people together and we can just maybe talk about it. On the other hand, in people in the helping community, like mental health therapists or even other helping professionals like nurses or teachers, like you mentioned, there can be this perspective around your vocation that you are needing to be a bit of a martyr, or there's a relinquishing of a desire for money because your work is so meaningful, or you're greedy if you want to make a good salary. There's just a lot of things that are thrown out there in that. And so I'm just finding myself aware of this tension that we can feel with ourselves or even in society against how do we allow ourselves to feel different about money and about other people's money? Do you have any thoughts about any of that?
Yeah, I love the question. Deeply love and appreciate the question. And yeah, the first thought I have is I do want to normalize it is okay if we have a lot of money to feel some of these feelings that we've talked about today,
Mm,
feelings associated with scarcity mindset. I have worked with lots of people that have lots of money and they are aware that they struggle with the scarcity money mindset. And that is your first friendly white flag that something deeper is going on. And so to really just make room for that feeling instead of dismissing it or saying we don't get to feel this or we're not allowed to really go, wait, I am feeling it. Wonder what that feeling is communicating to me. I wonder what needs to be paid attention to.
mm,
I really wanna normalize that. So I'll give you an example of what I mean by I'm working with a couple different couples right now as money coaching clients, and all of them have money, okay? Right now, they happen to all be heterosexual couples and 2 incomes, so both husband and wife are working, but the husband is bringing in more money. And wives, there is a similar pattern actually in all 3 wives for different reasons, I will say, that whenever the husband asks for, "Hey, can we talk about this decision we need to make around money?" Right? So they're actually inviting their wives
mm,
into the financial conversation. They value their wives' opinions and want their wives' help. The wives, in various different forms, ends up avoiding or dismissing that bid,
mm,
that bid for connection or that request to talk about a certain decision. And the husbands have felt how they have described that is that they feel very lonely, and they
mm,
actually feel stress around some of the finances, which they eventually use the word scarcity for, even though they're doing just fine. They know it doesn't make sense. But when we have drilled down and done the work, even if they come from generational wealth and one of them does, they've always known they would be provided for in abundance. What we have seen similar patterns of is some form of one or both parents being emotionally unavailable or emotionally immature, them knowing that their parents love them, but not feeling the connection, right? And so that at the end of the day is a wound that absolutely deserves to be cared for and healed, but how it shows up is that they feel lonely around finances and managing the family's finances. And the pressure is we don't have enough money. And they go to their wives to have a conversation to brainstorm. And their wife says, not now. In this situation, it's really not about the money. They've got plenty of money. And yet, all of these emotions that they have around scarcity are so real and so valid. And so, really, is the wives' avoidance. There's a reason that they're avoiding and they feel overwhelmed. And that is very real and very valid. And we really begin to sink into that and begin to open that up and understand it. Oh, the amount of healing, it just gives me goosebumps even as I
mm,
say it. The amount of connection that ends up getting formed from that when they understand that their wounds are being activated and how to actually help each other heal in that and how to come together. The second group of people you asked about are helping professions that believe that they're not worthy of money, that they
yeah.
should do things for free, that they shouldn't charge a high amount. And I don't like to overgeneralize, but to lump that kind of all in, the theme that is the most common, not everyone, but the theme that is the most common there is usually something about our belief in our value or our worth. Something about, well, I don't deserve to charge that much as a therapist. I would become a therapist for free. I just love this work so much I would do it for free versus I would do it for free. I love helping people, and I have sacrificed a lot to be here. I have school loans. I surrendered multiple years of income opportunity, lost income opportunity because of going to grad school. And therefore, this is a reasonable fee to charge whatever the case may be. And I know not everyone is therapists. I know there are pastors and preachers and teachers that don't even have that type of freedom. You're kind of still looking at your belief system around whether or not you feel like I'm worthy of more can be very healing because again, at the end of the day, what we're talking about here is mental health. We're not actually
Mhm.
talking money. Even if your money situation isn't going to change, still looking at your relationship with money is an avenue to healing wounds that don't show up anywhere else in your world. For whatever reason, your body and my body chose to put them onto money, right? So it's got to be an area that we look at.
I really love that we're ending on this because I think there's also a part of me that's getting activated of thinking about the stress of money just in general, of prices go up and maybe your raises aren't going up to match that and housing and all of these really real threats around money and anxious feelings. And I'm coming back to what you said earlier. There's still choice. There's still, I could rearrange things. I could save up for this. I could put where my values lie into these money decisions. And I think being able to hold on to that and really challenge ourselves when there is those very normal pressures around money to see, check in, what else is going on here? Yes, we can validate that this is a stressor. And is there more of a load? Is there more of an emotion that's happening that's not just the numbers on a spreadsheet? Any final thoughts before we get into some resources or how to connect with you?
No, I've loved the conversation. It lights me up. I'm so grateful to be here and
Yeah,
to get to engage in this conversation with you. It's really cool.
me too. Let's start with resources. If there's anybody that wants to continue thinking about this or
Mhm.
continue on their own work, what are some ways?
So we mentioned this earlier, obviously growing awareness. I know that sounds simple. It's much harder than it sounds. Oftentimes we'll feel something and we won't actually acknowledge it for a couple of days or even understand it for a couple of days. So that could be really just beginning to slow down enough to say, I feel uncomfortable with this, but I don't yet know why. That's like a massive step. Another way is to start to begin to ask ourselves questions. I'll give you some examples here of questions that people could like journal around and just take half an hour to themselves and see what comes up. Often stuff will come out while we're journaling that we're not conscious of. And these questions I'm about to give you are actually part of one of my freebies called Better Money Health. So let's put a link in the show notes to the Better Money Health freebie.
Yeah.
But if you're in a partnership, these are a few questions that you can ask. And then after these, I'll share some questions for people that are single. If you're in a partnership, you can ask your partner, what is one fear you have around finances? When does this fear become most activated in our relationship? What do you need from me when your fear is feeling really big? Listen and discuss these with your partner. And then maybe in a different conversation, ask your partner to ask you the same questions,
Mm.
right? And let the focus be on you in that later conversation and see what you guys learn about each other. See what understanding and intimacy gets birthed from that. If you're single, and really, I actually encourage, even if you're not single, to ask yourself these questions because it all starts with our own relationship to money. But journaling about these three questions. Am I acquainted with my fear that gets placed onto money? Do I even know it exists? How does this fear show up in my body? Meaning, what are my first warning signs my fear is being activated? Okay, beginning to draw awareness to that and observation around that. And the last question is, what is one thing I can do today to help care for this unprocessed fear in my body?
Those are great questions. I love that. And I am so glad that we'll have a link to that to be able to follow up there.
And then a few other free stuff would be my podcast. Right now, it's from a couple years ago. I think there's only like 12 episodes, but it's called The Psychology of Money with Tamasin Thomas. I do hope to bring it back up. But essentially, the first 12 or 13 episodes are people just, we're basically recording a conversation with money, and you get to
Mm.
explore their relationship with money with us. Very brave souls that have been on there. So that can help grow some awareness and just make you feel less alone. And then Instagram, I'm really learning about Instagram and trying to create posts that are really packed with value. And there's a lot of free journal prompts on there. There's a lot of free regulating exercises for our body when our body gets activated or anxious around money. Giving me a follow on there. And then if you did want to work one on one, we can do that in a coaching capacity. We cannot in a therapy capacity. Basically, there's a application you fill out letting me know a little bit about what you're looking for. And then if that sounds like it could be a good fit, I offer just a 15-minute free video consultation where we just get to really iron out, make sure it's a good fit. And then at that point, if it is, we can schedule a couple sessions, put them on the calendar and work together. There's a max of 12 sessions, but I don't hold anyone to that. And you could do one session, you can do five sessions, you can do 12 sessions.
I love those options. And we'll have all of this information in the show notes and in our post on our website as well. But thank you so much for your time and sharing all this wisdom with us. I think it's just really nice to be in this space where we're thinking about these things. And I feel like I've grown a lot too. So appreciate that.
Yeah, I've loved it. Thank you so much for having me. It's been fun.
Relational Psych is a mental health group practice providing depth-oriented psychotherapy and psychological testing in person in Seattle and online in Washington State. If you're interested in mental health care for yourself or a family member, please reach out. Our website is relationalpsych.group.